So I was going to do this a couple of weeks ago, but I missed out on doing it. But I think this is still quite important to do because this really sets out what the Tories intend to do once, if we leave the European Union. And that is to completely deregulate everything. And once again, it all goes back to this book, which was written way back in 2010, called Britannia Unchained. So this is from the Guardian. Sorry, and it's want to know what a Boris Johnson government would look like. I've just read the book. So 7 years ago, a group of Conservative MPs who had taken their parliamentary seats in 2010 brought out a slim manifesto for the future of Britain titled Britannia Unchained. So we're going to go through some fun names here. Kurzai Kutweng, I think that's how you say it, Priti Patel, Dominic Raab, Chris Skidmore, and Liz Truss appeared to speak with one voice, that of the unabashed Thatcherites, convinced that hacking back tax and regulation and fixing on the demands of business was an appropriate for them that for 21st century UK, as it had supposedly had been for the crisis-plagued Britain of the 1970s. Some of the text was so provocative that reading it that it read like a trolling. The British are among the world's worst idlers, it said. Read one passage. We work amongst the lowest hours and retire early, and our productivity is low. Whereas Indian children aspire to be doctors or businessmen, the British are more interested in football and pop music. To even start to compare with the rising economies of Indochina and Brazil, said the authors, we need to avenge the dependency culture and stop indulging in irrelevant debate about the sharing the pie between the manufacturing and the services, the North and the South, women and men. They advised fellow Conservatives to double down on austerity and maintain their faith in old-fashioned laissez-faire economics. All five of Britannia's Unchained gang are now supporters of Boris Johnson, which may be wincing at his scattergun spending pledges, but they are presumably thrilled by his embrace of cutting corporation tax, what one report called a Trump-style moratorium on all new regulations, and a surreal idea of turning up at least 6 UK places, including Belfast, into free ports that would charge no tariffs or tax. One piece, of course, was brilliantly time moved last week, when the news of obesity was now rivaling smoking as a cause of cancer, concluded with at least hostile manoeuvrings of the so-called sugar tax. Among the highest profile Tories at the forefront of Johnson's leadership campaign was Truss, the current chief secretary to the Treasury. In response to the sugar tax story, she tweeted, "Taxes on treats that hit those on the lowest incomes, we should be, quote, should be hashtag free to choose. The apparent suggestion was that if the rich were to pay less tax, it was only right that the poor should get a few pence off their next soft drink, with the consequence incidental, of course, the biggest corporations, such as Coca-Cola, linked to Johnson via one Will Wowden, an advisor who works for a lobbying firm that represents it, would be able to again offload their output at a much as bad as before." None of this was terribly surprising. In the recent past, Truss had bemoaned the tendency of people in positions of power to sound off about people drinking too much and eating too many donuts. It holds out that the prospects of growing burden on the NHS she appears to have covered that calls for increased spending, it seems, may yet be offset by the wonders of technology, a subject that the self-styled disruptor-in-chief has attempted to make her own. In health, disruptive new entrepreneurs are revolutioning hospital treatment, she offered back in January of last year. Everyday goods like smartwatches have the potential to transform public health with real-time peer-to-peer information. Like TripAdvisor, surely we can remove some of our bureaucracy. Which brings us to something very interesting. If you want a sense of how the looming Johnson administration might deal with the ever-increasing question of handing over big tech trusts, is a good person to watch. For the best part of 2 years, she has been making speeches warning any would-be interviewers that such companies should be left alone. When Labour talked about digital monopolies profiting from everyone's searches and shares, she said that it might impose a windfall tax on them to fund public interest journalism. She jumped at the conclusion that it wanted to, quote, nationalise the internet, as she sees it. Uber is simply a company that is bringing choice and value to a huge number of people, while Airbnb is making it easier for people to rent out rooms or to find a cheaper place to stay. This sounds less like intelligent politics than someone reading out adverts while sitting on the tube, but it reflects a belief that, quote, people who want to change the nature of the internet and thereby imperil the lifestyle freedom are the enemies of liberty. What Truss and her ilk don't seem to understand is that lots of trailblazing, dialectically libertarian tech people don't like these companies either, rightly seeing them as the malignant concentrations of power and antithetical to the internet's original ethos, whereas droves of people working on blockchain technology and aiming to foster decentralization alternatives to the establishment platforms. As with the corporations now at the heart of the modern food economy, the internet's big players have been through their unregulated disruptive phase, much as traditional industries went through their equivalent in the 19th century. And just as we now have to talk about diet and public health, we are also in a period of marked by those platforms, obvious downsides, an array of damaging effects on society, and the fact that, true to capitalist form, the most powerful firms have hardened into monopolies, which tend to eat up any startups that pose a threat. In the Britannia Unchained view of things, the only way to deal with these problems is to encourage the kind of competition that big tech's power has long since squashed, and that to suggest any imbalances demanded action by governments is to embrace the thinking of the bureaucrat, a belief that neatly chimes with Brexit. The EU has been in the forefront of conversations about what to do about Uber, Amazon, Facebook and Google and all the rest. So have politicians and institutions in the US, as well as many of Silicon Valley's insiders who believe in the profit motive and the wonders of free trade as a matter of instinct. But some 21st century Tories are lost in the woods, and their instinctive position is to scoff at any claim that all this activity is about protecting consumers and innovators, insisting instead that it is time to rush to the aid of the free market. Even the free market has long since ceased to exist. Truss says that she believes in, quote, a nation of Airbnb-ing, Deliveroo eating, Uber riding freedom fighters. But what she and many other Johnson supporters seem to be advocating is much less flash, leaving monopolies and oligarchies untroubled, in the service of our old friend, disaster capitalism. We all know that they have in mind. Come autumn, Britain may well get a huge shock. Penury will beckon. The only way to avoid it, we will be told, will be to bin regulation, drastically lower taxes, and become tech, finance, and the corporate food industry's offshore playground. Then a terrifying future will open up. A few people creaming it in, while millions of ill, poor, and essentially insecure people remain glued to their smartphones to either wait their next casual shift at a fulfillment center or spend whatever crumbs they are paid on the latest useless innovation. Such are the uplands of freedom offered by a party that seems to have lost what was left of its moral bearings. The resolve is not much to unchain us, but to imprison Britain in a true blue stupidity. And that's where we're going. That's one of the reasons why we should absolutely remain in the EU. A lot of these regulations aren't, chaining down big companies. They are protecting consumers. They are trying to break monopolies, even though, at some point there are cases that you can claim the EU is quite protectionist, but it is overly protectionist of companies of companies that are in Europe. Places where you can potentially get work. That is a good thing. And even, but there you go. We are in yeah, this is one of the potential things that could happen to us, and it's really terrifying if these, if the Tories do remain in power. They will completely cut back drastically on taxes, which will again harm the NHS, because the NHS needs money to function, and you need to tax these big corporations. But the thing is, Britain by itself is too small to tax these corporations. The EU is big enough to be able to do it, but not Britain by itself. Not only that, you have immeasurable tax loopholes that exist in this country that the Tories aren't going to get rid of. Airbnb is one of the biggest problems to the housing industry at the moment. It is part and parcel of the housing crisis. Many of these people that are renting their things out on Airbnb and are claiming them to be, quote, an alternative to hotels, aren't even paying the same tax as a hotel would. But, there you go.